Mr. Scrubby Tennis.
Here.
Mr. Khan.
Here.
Mr. McPartland.
Here.
Mr. Oster.
Here.
Mr. DiArpino.
Here.
Chairman Walsh.
Here, I'd just like to state this is the March 25th, 2019 meeting of the Planning Board and Zoning Commission. We have the approval of the minutes from the March 11th, 2019 meeting that were included in your packet. I have, let's ask for a motion to approve the minutes as soon as I find them. There we are. Have a motion to approve it. So, moved by Mr. Khan and seconded. Okay, I'll second the approval of the minutes. Any comments or changes to the minutes? No? Okay, seeing no changes or comments to the minutes, all those favor of approval of minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. So that's unanimous. And we'll move on the agenda. We have no public hearings tonight, so we'll move right to privilege of the floor. Anyone wishing to be heard regarding any planning and zoning matters in the town of Niskuna, please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record, and we'll listen to what you have to say. So privilege of the floor is open.
Darrell Bray, 1420 Van Antwerp Road. I'd like to just take a moment to talk about the subdivision at 1380 Van Antwerp Road, which is next door to my house. And to think about it in context of previous subdivisions of that corner. When I bought my house close to 20 years ago, that was a very wooded area. Had deer in the yard. Red fox would often come through the yard. Pileated woodpeckers, which are now all gone because they've already removed all the trees when they subdivided previously, which I felt, I think that you guys made it was a compromise position to subdivide the lot with the assumption that the existing property from 1820 or whenever the original farmhouse was built, that property would remain intact. However, now it looks like they're coming back now again a year later to subdivide that, which seems to go against what the intent was originally. But then besides that, the impact on the water table, I have a storm drain that runs through my backyard that seemed to be at times overburdened by the existing runoff as it is. But then there's a secondary issue, which is the groundwater on the other side of where of McGovern, where the water runs into a wetland. And there's a pipe there that runs under the road, but generally it just goes into that catch basin, which then the water just goes into the ground and then comes up on the other side in my backyard. And which was much worse last year than it had been previously. And I've been there almost 20 years. So, there are sometimes that's wetter than others. But the overall effect seemed to be fairly negative as far as even in August, which would pretty much always be dry, I was like sinking into the mud to the ankles down where my shed is. And it just to further develop and remove trees, or even if they try to save some of the trees, any grading that you do is going to devastate those trees. Those trees are 100+ years old. They're not going to be able to handle that. And combine that with the removal of the trees that they did last year. It's just you're adding a lot of water to the water table. At least that's what it seems like to me. Not to mention the birds and the animals that depend on those trees, and limiting the biodiversity within our community, which is one of the things that really attracted me to be here. When I was looking to buy a home to raise a family, the tree-lined streets, the neighborhood feel, and not the heavy overdevelopment that some areas have, was a big factor for me. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. I don't know that this is something that is in the best interest of our town. I feel like the damage overall to the neighborhood, it's already been significant. So then now you added to say, well, this isn't really that much more significant damage than what they've already done. But like when you look at it on a whole, it's really pretty significant to take away such a large, treed area and to maintain some of that feel, any of the trees, and then to just wedge in as many houses as you can just doesn't seem like that's a great idea. One of the great things is having you guys here and having you been in these positions for so long. I think that that with good conscience what you think is right and what you thought was right when you're doing this. And I hope that you can keep that in mind when you make your decision as whether or not this is something that you feel like is the best thing for our town going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Adam Reuter, 2505 McGovern Drive. I'm also speaking with regard to 1380 Van Antwerp Road. At the last meeting, I was here and I spoke about how that property and the historical nature of that property is really a landmark for our whole neighborhood that stretches back into that area down Hilltop Road, down McGovern Drive. And I think it really speaks to and reinforces the nature of that house and that property being the gateway to the community, that over a dozen community members have sent letters and emails since that last meeting speaking about this and advising the planning board to not go forward with this type of subdivision in that spot. The house, as the last speaker mentioned, is a historical house built in 1826. The carriage house was built is also pre-Civil War. Shows up on maps of the town from 1866, and it really speaks to how much that plot has been a part of this community and has been a part of that neighborhood since its inception. And most of the houses in the area were built in the 50s and 60s and since then, but that's really been the constant and the touch point for the whole neighborhood. Adding two additional units on that plot, in addition to the three that were built behind it last year, would significantly change the character of that plot and the neighborhood behind it. And I won't get into the water impacts, the previous speaker did, but I just point out the three behind it because I do think that there are additive impacts of additional development on top of what was done last year. And from going from one building to one house to six on that plot is a significant impact compared to a significant loss of the trees and impact on the water quality and on the water runoff. I think that this is particularly important because Niskayuna is a climate smart community. The town has adopted the Department of Environmental Conservation's Climate Smart Communities pledge and qualified as a climate smart community. Climate impacts are only going to be growing over the coming years. And one of the key elements of being a climate smart community is taking into consideration resiliency, climate resiliency. And as we've seen each year, more storms, more harsh weather, the more that we lessen our neighborhood's ability to withstand those storms, to absorb those that type of weather, the more that impacts all of us. So I certainly recommend that you take that into consideration as you are looking and reviewing this property. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. My name is Chuck Petrowski, 1336 Stanley Lane here in Niskayuna. I appreciate your time tonight, and I will reinforce the statements of the previous two speakers. I apologize for being a little late tonight, and I thank the board for their time tonight. This is on the 1380 Van Antwerp subdivision. I'll keep it short and to the point. It is a serial subdivision. It's an ecological and cultural assault on our community. Should this major minor subdivision go through, it will forever change the balance of the character of the community, which will never be regained. And it's just, it's inappropriate. I hope you find it unacceptable. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Vicki Michella. I live at 2525 Antonia Drive. So the last time I was here, I don't come that often, but the last time I was here, I remember it was about the apartment complex proposal on next to WRGB. And I was one of the few people that was in favor of that because I felt that that was an example of smart growth. And this proposal for 1380 is not an example of smart growth at all. So I jotted down a few things, which you're probably familiar with, but I will read a few examples of smart growth planning. Reuse already developed land, mix land uses, create a range of housing choices, create walkable neighborhoods, foster distinctive, attractive communities with a strong sense of place, and preserve open space, farmland, natural beauty, and critical environmental areas. And I would add to that historical. And I think, you know, in every single one of these areas, the proposal to develop 1380, the property, does not fall into any of those categories. And I think it would be a big mistake to further subdivide it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Holmes, and I live at 1379 Van Antwerp. And for those of you who don't know me or don't remember me, I am the former owner of 1380 Van Antwerp Road. I want to remind the planning board of the subdivision we did 2 years ago. You did it, and I did it. We balanced the pressures of development with the preservation of this historic property. I wanted to see the homestead remain on a larger piece of land, with the carriage house intact, as well as the extensive and beautiful landscaping, as it has been for 200 years, nearly 200 years. There are countless people who visit Hilltop Road every year just to see the massive forsythia patch bloom, and many inquisitive strangers to whom I've given a free tour of the carriage house, or as many black walnuts as they can carry. So many soccer games played on the extensive grounds, with the ancient tree trunks serving as goalposts. I consider this application for a re-subdivision to 6 lots to be a de facto major subdivision, and the applicants should be held to the standards of a major subdivision, which might include the preparation of a SWIP, the setting aside of parkland, and the appropriate extension of utilities. They should not be allowed to use that developer's trick of serial minor subdivisions of the same property within a short period of time to accomplish the goals of a major subdivision. It is segmentation, that is, the deliberate breakdown of a larger project into smaller pieces to avoid the cumulative impact of development, including impact to wildlife, historical and cultural significance, and stormwater. Town Code 189-15-B requires that subdivisions, quote, be in harmony with the master plan. And the 2013 master plan states, quote, generally, development has always been carefully planned by giving consideration to creating a balance that harmonizes with the natural surroundings. The past few decades have seen a significant period of construction on many fronts, which at times has caused much public debate over what value should be placed on historic sites and properties. Historical preservation is a local town responsibility, and every effort should be made to actively protect historic sites and properties, unquote. Hopefully it sounds familiar. This is indeed a historic property, which is likely eligible for inclusion on the State Register of Historic Places. There are many sources and reasons to support the claim that this property is historic. For example, 2018 study by Guy Spears entitled A Graphic History of Niskayuna, which states that this homestead was built in 1826 and is the 26th oldest homestead in Niskayuna. Maps from 1856 and also 1866 in particular, which indicates that a R. Van Vranken lived in the main house and a G. Van Vranken lived in the carriage house, with the two residences connected via a driveway, exactly as it is today. A list of town supervisors from the Town of Niskayuna website, which indicates that many Van Vrankens served as town supervisor during the 1800s, including a G. Van Vranken, who served more than once. My deed, an inch thick of it, with all the history of the house dating back to 1826. It confirms the ownership of the home by Richard and Garrett Van Vranken. There's other various online resources which indicate that Ricard and Garrett Van Vranken from the Netherlands were among the earliest settlers of Schenectady County, and we all know the famous road in Schenectady named for the Van Vranken family. The main house is a classic Dutch post and beam colonial. The carriage house was built to complement the main house, with Dutch lap siding, as opposed to the clapboard siding used on the main house, very typical of outbuildings built in that time. Although the carriage house would require renovation to be used as a modern-day living quarters, it is structurally sound and retains many of the classic and original architectural features, including woodwork, windows, flooring, doors, hardware, horsehair plaster walls, and a very rare bathtub. An old letter, couple letters, indicate that the property was a potato farm. Since land needed to be kept cleared for the farming operation, I speculate that the owners chose to plant special trees closer to the home to provide shade and beauty, but also for other purposes: sugar maples for syrup, black walnut trees for nuts, mulberry and apple trees for fruit, and catalpa and forsythia for flowers. The trees and other landscaping add to the history of the property. Additionally, Town Code 180-9-C requires that, quote, clearing and grading shall be substantially confined to designated building envelopes, utility easements, driveways, and parking footprint. Clearing and grading techniques should retain natural vegetation and drainage patterns, unquote. Hopefully that sounds familiar. The 2017 subdivision, which we did, it's right here. This demonstrated how those three lots could have been developed with minimal clearing, tree cutting, and disturbance, according to the code I just read you. However, what we ended up with was an essential clear cut of those three lots, so very different from these plans, and with a much higher impact. It seems that only a single street tree has been replanted on the new lots, and it appears to be dead already. Clearly, more than an acre was disturbed, which is the threshold for preparation of a SWIP, according to Town Code Section 180, which classifies a major project as any land development activity that disturbs 1 acre or more, including a residential development of 2 or more dwelling units. If a SWIP hasn't been prepared to this point, one should be, especially now that Mr. Bray has witnessed an increase in stormwater runoff onto his property, which is very possibly due to the clear cutting. A 6-lot subdivision on this property was wrong 2 years ago, and it's still wrong today, and all of us know it. It's actually more wrong today because the developers cleared so much on the first 3 lots, seemingly without regard for the original plans or the character of the neighborhood. A 6-lot subdivision would tip the scales in favor of development and put less weight on character, historic preservation, and environmental concerns. The addition of 2 or even 1 more house to that property would forever alter its appearance. And I don't believe that preserving the carriage house or marking a few significant trees to be preserved would make this project right. Because when you regrade, when you drive construction equipment nearby, when you hit the trees with your backhoe, when you alter the groundwater flow, make it higher, make it lower, when you alter the wind currents, you can kill those preserved trees just as easily as if you had chainsawed them down. Destroying any of the aspects of that property that we chose to preserve 2 years ago, the structures, the trees, the landscaping, would forever alter the character of the Woodcrest neighborhood. The intent of the historical preservation section of the comprehensive plan is to save not only structures, but also properties of historical significance. The intent of this proposal seems to run counter with the intent of the town's rules and the needs of the neighborhood. The design and intent of what we did 2 years ago was right because it was a balance, but the execution was wrong. And it would be even more wrong to make it worse in 2019. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else for privilege of the floor? Anyone? Last chance. Okay, seeing no one else for privilege of the floor, we'll close privilege of the floor, and we'll move on the agenda. We have no unfinished tonight. No unfinished business tonight. We do have a couple of resolutions under new business. First resolution being Resolution 2019-06, resolution for site plan approval of J-Dog Wholesale Distribution Facility at 398 Anthony Street. Mr. Twitty, would you please read the resolution?
One of the purposes of the meeting was to take action on an application for site plan review. Whereas Ray Gagnon of Business Operational Success Systems has made an application to the planning board for a new tenant at 398 Anthony Street, as shown in a site plan application entitled Lot Line Adjustment between the lands of 398 Anthony Street LLC and Aqua Vista Realty Ltd, dated January 26, 2018. And whereas the zoning classification of the property is IG, General Industrial, and whereas the planning board referred this application to the town superintendent of water, sewer, and engineering, the fire district chief, and the chief of police, and there were no objections to the proposal. And whereas the Conservation Advisory Council reviewed the application on March 6, 2019, and at that time recommended that the lead agency issue a negative secret declaration. And whereas the planning board, acting in accordance with state environmental quality review regulations and local law, assumed the position of lead agency for this project, determined the project will not have a significant effect on the environment, and directed the town planner to file a negative declaration. And whereas this board has carefully reviewed the proposal, and by this resolution does set forth its decision hereon, now therefore be it hereby resolved that this planning board hereby determines that this project will not have a significant effect on the environment and hereby directs the town planner to file a negative declaration. And be it further resolved that the Planning Board and Zoning Commission finds that the site plan referenced above meets the requirements of the zoning code and hereby approves this site plan and tenant space as shown on the map entitled Lot Line Adjustment between the lands of 398 Anthony Street LLC and Aqua Vista Realty Ltd, dated January 26, 2018, with the following conditions. 1. This resolution shall be incorporated into any deed of sale for this property, and the conditions of this resolution shall be binding on the applicant, the owner if different than the applicant, their successors, assigns, or transferees. 2. No hazardous materials shall be stored on the site. 3. All recycled materials stored on the site shall be contained in material piles not to exceed 20 feet in height. 4. The parking of unregistered vehicles and equipment on this property shall be limited to 2. 5. All large truck traffic associated with the property is encouraged to enter and exit the area via Technology Drive to limit the impact to nearby residential properties. 6, the applicant shall comply with any requirements of the underlying sole source aquifer restrictions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Twitty. Do I have a motion on the resolution?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Mr. Scributinus. Have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. McPartlin. We'll have some discussion. I was just talking to Laura just before we got started, and I did have a concern with condition number 2, no hazardous materials shall be stored on the site. There may be hazardous materials that the applicant will need just in the common course of performing their business, such as maybe solvents or things, or I guess gasoline would be considered hazardous, just in the maintenance area. So I just was a little concerned, and I had some words I proposed for Laura, just to still meet the intent of what we were looking for. And the intent was not to bring in any hazardous materials or store hazardous materials on site. Laura, could you give the read?
Yeah, so we had that the business shall not collect hazardous materials and store them on site.
Yeah, we just we're trying to keep them from collecting and bringing hazardous materials in and then store them on
Oh,
site.
yeah, right, sorry, no.
Right.
Business shall not collect and store hazardous materials.
Right.
And then we were trying to figure, like, we could say, the business shall not collect and store hazardous materials from their off-site operations on-site or something like.
So Rob, I think Rob can verify, but I don't think we can make the statement the business shall not collect. I think we can only say about shall not store
Oh, yeah.
any
okay.
collected hazardous material on
Yeah,
site.
that's
a good
probably
way.
true
I
too.
think, yeah.
Well, we could say the business shall not store hazardous materials collected from their off-site cleanups or
However we want to
something.
say it, yeah. If we want to just draw the line that's collected, but we can only, I think, forbid the storing, not the
Storage is the
collection.
issue, correct?
Okay. So the recommendation is just to say shall not collect hazardous materials.
Shall not store them on site.
Shall not store any collected hazardous
Okay,
material.
shall not store any
on site.
collected hazardous material. All right. I
What do we
think
say for the,
we didn't because their business model was different.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
there
it was
wasn't a
different.
condition.
So they had to do what we made them do is they had to do a hazardous waste management plan that they submitted to us, and our engineering department reviewed it.
Yeah, so I just didn't want to make things complicated for the applicant in case they had any chemicals on site that were allowed to do their business. Sure, you come on up and please state your name.
For their vehicles, yeah.
Yeah, and any solvents for
Well.
cleaning things, you know?
Yeah, Ray Gagnon, 398 Anthony Street. We don't collect any hazardous material in the business.
Right.
So we're not allowed to by law, and we're not allowed to by franchise agreement. So we don't collect any, so we don't store it there, but you're right. We have a couple of gas cans that we use for our vehicles or mowers and stuff like that. But other than that, I mean, we have less there than I have at my house.
Okay.
We don't even have any solvents. We use the safe cleaners and
Right.
hand cleaners and all that stuff.
And the other option we talked about, Laura and I, was that just striking condition number 2 because the business, doesn't do that. Do we need to even have a statement? So that's the other option.
I'm more comfortable with that actually, because I know you take tires, you don't store them long-term, but you may store them for a while. to
Yes, ma'am.
long enough. Once they're starting to burn, they're very hazardous.
Oh, you mean, we don't burn them?
Yeah.
No, you don't, but potentially they are hazardous because of that fact. So I'm uncomfortable with it for that reason as well.
Yeah, so I can go either way, either strike number 2 or modify number 2. I mean, we had the business plan, it's basically, like you said, we don't bring anything hazardous in. Any thoughts from other board members on?
well, now that we brought it up, I actually think we should keep it because I think that if we take it out now, I think it might almost be, we're saying it's okay to bring in hazardous
Okay.
materials.
All right, that sounds reasonable.
Well,
Yeah.
can we somehow recognize that we expect that they will store tires on the interim basis till they have a batch to send off for recycling?
Well, we've already,
It's in there,
Yeah, it's there. It's part of the business plan.
but there
I'm not,
been some terrible fires involving tires.
yeah, but there's got to be a fire to cause your concern, right? Storing
yeah.
of tires themselves, I don't believe is hazardous because you can't take any hazardous, right? So,
because a lot of things when they catch on fire do become
Right.
hazardous, but I think you're only looking at things that are regulated as hazardous.
correct.
So
Yeah,
we,
tires are not considered hazardous material.
right.
But
So
they
we
are when they
Except maybe
burn.
in California.
Yeah, probably in
And
California.
Massachusetts, probably.
Oh, yeah, you're
I
right.
think your original language, whatever.
So
you
the
said,
business
you said.
shall not store hazardous materials collected during off-site cleanup operations.
I think you just say any hazardous material collected.
Okay,
think
so
that's
the
it.
business shall not store hazardous materials. Collected.
Collected.
Collected
hazardous.
hazardous
All right.
materials.
All right, the business shall not store hazardous materials collected.
The business shall not store collected hazardous materials.
Rob, it sounds good to you?
Yes.
All right, let me have a motion to modify this condition number 2 as stated.
Motion to.
Motion by Mr. Khan and second by Mr. Oster. Okay, then I'm going to like to have a motion to approve the resolution as modified.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Mr. Scributinus and seconded by Ms. Gold. Any other discussion? No? Okay, please call the roll.
Ms. Gold,
Aye.
Mr. Scributinus,
Aye.
Mr. Khan,
Aye.
Mr. McPartlin.
Aye.
Mr. Oster,
Aye.
Mr. DiRapino,
Aye.
Chairman Walsh.
Aye, resolution is approved. Thank you. Yeah, we just want to make sure we get it right. We don't cause any issues either. And I know you're already there, so hopefully you're being successful and you continue to be successful. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, second resolution, Resolution 2019-07, a resolution for site plan approval of an Edward Jones office at 2317 Balltown Road. Mr. Twitty?
One of the purposes of the meeting was to take action on an application for site plan review. Whereas Parkland Development Corporation has made an application to the planning board for a new tenant at 2317 Balltown Road, as shown on an untitled site plan received by the planning department on March 14, 2019. And whereas the zoning classification of the property is RP, residential and professional, and whereas the planning board referred this application to the town superintendent of water, sewer, and engineering, the fire district chief, and the chief of police, and there were no objections to the proposal. And whereas this board has carefully reviewed the proposal, and by this resolution does set forth its decision hereon, now therefore be it hereby resolved that this planning board and zoning commission finds that the site plan referenced above meets the requirements of the zoning code, and hereby approves the site plan intended space as shown on an untitled site plan received by the planning department on March 14, 2019.
Okay, thank you. I have a resolution. Oh, I'm sorry. Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, I just wish to recuse myself from this resolution.
Yes, thank you, Mr. McPartlin. So noted. Have a motion on the resolution for approval?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Oster, second. Seconded by Mr. Khan, and discussion.
Do we regularly just approve tenant changes? I mean, it seems, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And the only question I had is, whatever the sign that we had approved before for the property, the labeling for this business will be consistent with that signage, right? I was hoping to have seen a sign.
Good evening, Michael McPartlin, on behalf of Parkland Development, who's representing the building owner at 2317 Balltown Road. Yes, their signage will be listed just as the other tenants, and the sign will be as was approved by the town.
Okay.
And what was the previous use of the space?
It was a woman that ran a psychology practice that focused on young children.
So there's really a minimal increase in the amount of personnel.
Probably less so.
Less so.
I think Edward Jones might have 1 to 2 employees, maybe 3 at most, normal business hours.
And no problems with parking, everything. I mean,
Yeah.
it looks like it's a 1-for-1, so there shouldn't be any issues, right? So,
Right.
any other questions for the applicant or discussion at all? No, seeing none, please call the roll.
Ms. Gold,
Aye.
Mr. Scributinus,
Aye.
Mr. Khan,
Aye.
Mr. Oster,
Aye.
Mr. DiRapino,
Aye.
Chairman Walsh.
Aye, resolution's approved. Again, thank you and good luck. And we'll move into discussion items. First up for discussion is 1380 Van Antwerp Road, sketch plan application for a 3-lot minor subdivision. And I know we have Mr. Alessi, right, representing the applicant here. And I'm going to turn over things to Mr. McPartlin, if that's okay.
All right.
All right.
Hi, Luigi. So I think Laura reached out to you and the owner of the parcel to see if we could get a little more feedback from him on intent to develop the parcel and any openness to some of the comments we've received from
the neighbors.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did talk to Lou Lisi, and he wasn't able to attend tonight. He has another project that he's working on that he had to go to tonight, so he could not make it tonight.
Okay.
But I'm here to, help the board here with any questions from the last meeting. And, since then, we've met with Laura and the tree council, walked the site. And, as far as I know, it's a 3-lot subdivision that we're proposing here. And when we walked it with the tree council, we flagged a lot of the trees that are out there. And, we're willing to save the trees that are there. There's several large trees. I think the subdivision works well where the proposed subdivided lines are in relationship to the existing trees, which will provide a nice existing buffer between the proposed house as well as, keeping the character of the existing 1380 Van Antwerp structure. We are keeping 1380 Van Antwerp structure with the driveway on Van Antwerp, and we're also proposing a new garage for 1380 Van Antwerp. That was another discussion that was here before the planning board when I was here last, whether or not additional garage structure would be proposed. And, when talking with Lou, he is willing to propose a garage for 1380 Van Antwerp Road. Another thing that came up last time was drainage. We're aware of, the drainage and where the drainage runs to. We provided a drainage analysis, provided it to Laura and the engineering department. Basically, we're not increasing any runoff. That's heading towards McGovern Drive. There's an existing low point that's there now, culvert that goes under the road and continues to drain in the back of the resident there that spoke earlier. We're not increasing the runoff going in that direction. The peak discharge rates were in compliance with the town code. We're in compliance with New York State DEC regulations. Lot number 2 it is, which is right at the intersection of Hilltop and Van Antwerp. That actually has a different watershed or drainage area. It drains to an existing catch basin right at the intersection of Van Antwerp and Hilltop. And that drainage there is, we're proposing a rain garden to accomplish any increase in peak discharge rates to the town's stormwater system. And by providing that rain garden, we'll actually reduce the peak discharge rates, allow some infiltration, and slowly discharge it into the town system so that, again, we're not increasing the peak discharge rates. So as far as drainage is concerned, we feel that we're adequately addressing those concerns. Again, the tree council met with them. They seemed pretty pleased with the trees that we're saving on site. It boils down to whether there's enough land or not to do a 3-lot subdivision. And when you read the code allows 3 lots here. We're not asking for any variances. We meet the frontage, we meet the lot area, we meet the setbacks. It's the developer's right to develop this project. And, I think I told this board before, I wasn't part of the previous subdivision. The previous subdivision was under a different entity, different developer. This is under Luigi Lisi and Eleanor Lisi, totally different than the previous subdivision. So, I guess I'm here for a 3-lot subdivision on this property. And, I'm doing the best I can to accommodate, what the zoning allows, what, my client is allowed to do here per zoning, and obviously working with the planning board to save trees and, do what we can to keep this moving along.
So there were 2 concerns raised by the town engineering department about high-pressure zones, utility high-pressure zones, and the siting of the water lateral on Van Antwerp Road. Did you resolve those two issues?
Yeah, so I think we talked a little bit about this at the last planning board meeting. Originally, we had proposed the two laterals going through via easements through the existing 1380 Van Antwerp lot, which would require removal of several trees. After we looked at it again, we revised the lateral location to tie into directly across from Van Antwerp Road. So by doing that, actually saves a lot of the existing mature trees that are on site right now. I have a call into Matt Yetto, and I haven't heard back from him yet, but I'll certainly keep trying to reach with him to, any further details that are needed for water lateral. But, I know the previous subdivision, they connected to McGovern. I think they extended a hydrant, it looks like, from being out there. But there's other laterals that were just recently connected on Van Antwerp as well. So I don't see it as a big issue, but I'll certainly work the details out with Matt Yetto.
Okay, thank you. One other point I wanted to address was raised during the public comment. We asked before about the state of the current condition of the carriage house, and someone who spoke today seemed to have it on good authority that it's in very good shape, but that seemed to conflict with a previous account. So can you kind of speak to the issues with preserving the carriage house?
Yeah, so right now, I mean, you go by it, it doesn't look like it's in good health. I haven't inspected it myself, but I know Lulisi did reach out to a couple folks that did take a look at it, because one of the comments from the planning board members was to possibly relocate it or move it onto 1380 property. And number one, it's expensive, and number two, you risk that structure just pretty much collapse during that move. So, the professionals that he reached out to that took a look at this didn't feel that it was feasible. So, and it was expensive, and not guaranteed. So that's why we decided to propose a new structure to provide, covered garages or parking space as required per town code. So.
Okay. One of the things I guess I'd like to mention is, listening to the public, and, I was around. In fact, there was 4 members on this board, 3 present tonight, that were part of the previous subdivision. And I believe, we did a lot of work on that with Ms. Holmes, and we weren't too excited about any subdivision even at that point in time. Nobody likes change, and a nice piece of property there.
Mm-hmm.
But we worked hard to end up where we're at with the, was it 4-lot subdivision, right? The 3 homes that were built and leaving the existing, now coming back again. And you heard from the public, and I know you've heard from past meetings, the concerns here about the historic nature, historic value, even if it's an unregistered historic structure,
Mm-hmm.
and the, and just the history there. So, the board here, if the applicant's going to hold on, which is your right, again, you meet all the requirements, a 3-lot subdivision, right? Then, we'd have to go forward and we'd have to make a decision on whether, we're going to grant sketch plan approval so you can proceed or deny you, all right? Right now, we're still kind of in the discussion phase, but I guess it's coming to a head here. If the applicant is going to hold on the 3-lot, then we're going to have to reach a decision and have a resolution for the next meeting regarding that.
Okay.
All right. Obviously, there's 3 options, nothing, and it doesn't sound like that's where the applicant's at, because obviously looking to develop the land and has the right to at least pursue that. Coming back with a 2-lot subdivision, which I know that a lot of people don't like, but we haven't seen anything on paper to even consider that. And maybe there's a way to, keep the carriage house, keep as many trees as possible, and maybe minimize the impact with 1 lot. I'm not saying it's possible until we see something that we can evaluate, right? And it sounds like doing nothing is not where, your applicant is at, the person that you're representing here, Mr. Lisi. Sounds like you've spoken and that you want to proceed.
Yeah, I think that's, the direction I've been leading towards. So
Yeah.
I would say
Yeah.
definitely, we would have brought before you a 2-lot subdivision, prior to tonight's meeting. Me as the engineer revised the initial sketch plan that
Yeah.
was before you, where I did minimize the grading
Yeah.
so that we could save the trees. We actually saved the driveway coming out onto Hilltop. So, we've done everything that we've been asked for question-wise
Right.
from the board. So, we'd like to continue with this 3-lot subdivision.
Laura, Mr. Chairman, I have a few questions, actually. So I remember the subdivision that resulted in 4 lots very well. So just a logistic thing, the remaining lots, 24, 56, 59, and 63, those were all sold within the last 2 years after our division?
Yeah, sold and
Including-
houses were built on them.
Okay. Do we have any insight into what plans those owners have? Have those owners?
They all have
documented?
houses on them.
Okay,
3 new houses.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, all 3 homes are owned by different people. Like they've been sold, people are living in it.
Yeah, do you
Families are
know who the
living-
developers for those 3 homes are?
They're actually living in them at this
I
point?
believe so.
Okay. I just-
Yeah, there's been,
Construction, I don't know if people actually-
At least 2 out of 3.
from my knowledge, there's been COs issued on all.
They're
3
temporary, yes, temporary COs.
Yeah. Do we know who the builder of those homes are?
It is Beacon Homes, which is related to Lulisi.
What was the name?
Beacon.
Homes.
Beacon.
It's his daughter.
Yeah, and, another question was, well, what's going on with 1380 Van Antwerp and Lou's daughter's living there right now in 1380. It's not a rental property. She is living there. She owns this property with her father.
She's living in which structure?
The existing structure, yes.
In the carriage home?
Well, I don't know if you're calling the existing home, nobode's living in the garage.
The
which I
greenhouse
think-
that's on.
Doing
Van
The primary
Yes.
residence, yeah.
The historic house? The one that you said is not in great shape?
No, she's not living in that one. She's living in the actual home.
The actual home,
1380,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't believe the carriage house isn't approved for occupancy, right?
No, no.
Oh.
Oh,
Can I just ask just a question here? It's just, how often do we have situations in the town where people don't follow they get approved to take down the trees, and how often do they take down more than what they plan?
I mean, it does happen. I couldn't say like us, how often. We certainly have seen it happen. At least 2 major times in the last, 2 years that I've been here, it's happened.
And is there any connection between this applicant and those prior instances?
Yeah, I mean, Lulisi did own a property that was cleared without a permit. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So
Go ahead, Scott.
I do want to make a comment. So it's clear from the public comment that we're getting that the public believes, and there's folks citing the code, et cetera, that we should have some way to mitigate what appears to be, regardless of its different developers that do it along the way, what ends up resulting in a serial subdivisioning, right? Obviously, if this plot had come in for 6 subdivisions from beginning, it would have been a very different story in front of us, right?
Right. That's right.
And I understand the fact, so I understand legally where you're parked, and I hope the public and everyone else in the neighborhood understands legally where the developer's parked. However, and this maybe is a question to Rob, I'd like to think that as a planning board, we have some way to mitigate against the effect of serial subdivisioning happening, regardless of if it's different developers doing it at different times.
Yeah, so that's really a 2-part question, and I'm happy to answer both parts. So let me start with the idea that there's a proposed change in our town code in the minor subdivision regs so that in the future, when someone is granted a minor subdivision, part of that approval will be waiver of any future subdivision to make sure that this board, so if things change over and we don't have the same continuity of board members or planner or that sort of thing, to make sure that we don't run into this situation again. Separately, I do want to speak to one of the issues that Mr. Paleschi raised, which we sometimes hear from developers, the idea that there's a subdivision as of right. And what in concept that is that we've got a proposed subdivision that complies with our zoning, like this one, where the lot is big enough to allow 2 additional lots. And so it meets the sort of threshold inquiry of density. That shouldn't be construed by this board as a subdivision as of right. So there are other things that could come into effect in the situation where there was something special about the proposed lots that made it, that there would be reasons to go outside just what zoning requires. So for instance, if there were safety or health, safety, general welfare, there's some case law out there that suggests that historical significance may be an issue. And so I'll look into that issue prior to the time that this board takes action on the applicant's request. But I do want to bring your attention to the fact that meeting the density component of zoning doesn't in and of itself get the developer over the hurdle of entitlement to a subdivision.
So if in fact the property had been added to the historic register, that would be a factor that would mitigate against.
Well, so let's say that's not these facts, right? Because
It's not,
this
but
isn't. So that would be more evidence of the fact that this property is unique compared to other properties that are zoned the same as this.
And I'm looking at it just coming in, being the new guy on this 3-lot subdivision, where 2 years ago when it was subdivided, if it was so unique, right? Typically, knowing this board on other subdivisions that I was part of, this board is always putting conditions on subdivisions. And to my knowledge, there was no conditions on further subdividing this land, which could have easily been put as a condition when that first subdivision came through. So, you know, again, if I was part of that initial subdivision, then I would probably be quiet up here, but I'm coming in after the fact, for this
Right, but-
parcel here.
But to Mr. Briggs's point, that it's going to change going forward. The question is, we have this in front of us now.
Yep, Mr. Hess, yep.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, point taken, and we learn our lesson, believe me.
Mhm.
And we usually try to think ahead, and apparently we missed that one. But we wish we did, obviously.
Mhm.
And but to Mr. Hess's point, where I'm at is, it's really the historic significance. And I was part of the board. I think it was Mr. Khan, Mr. Laflamme, and I believe Mr. Scributennis was here during the previous approvals. And it was a tough one to swallow, I'll be honest with you, even back then with the breaking it into the 4 lots. But when it was structured for the 4 lots, it did keep the frontage along Van Antwerp and Hilltop and intact. That's the way it was subdivided in order to maintain that property. That I do recall, even though the resolution may not reflect that.
Mhm.
Yep. And I'm just going to go on record and saying personally that someone who lived through that, I'm feeling really bad that we're getting beaten by the letter of the law here, not its spirit.
I don't think we're beaten at all, for the record.
Well, I'd love for us, the board, to figure out,
I absolutely recommend that you do not approve this sketch plan, and I think you have more than enough ground to stand on for not approving the sketch plan. And I am,
maybe I used the wrong tense of the word beaten.
I don't think we're that. No, don't agree.
Yeah, I don't think we're saying that we're beating or have given up. I think we're what we heard tonight is the applicant was going to go forward. And we're going to have a resolution at the next meeting, and we will do some research between now and the next meeting, and we'll take a vote and we'll make our decision.
It was never my intent
Yep,
that lot
exactly.
1380 should have ever been anything but the way it was in that previous subdivision. And I'm willing to challenge for as long as we can challenge this.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the engineering department isn't happy with the utilities right now. I know that Luigi's trying to work things out for them. Maybe he can figure something out next time, but right now we're not happy with the utilities. The cumulative increases in stormwater, I think that we can look at the cumulative increases in stormwater as being too much. I think there's plenty of evidence that this is a very historical structure. I've reached out to the town historian. He's researching it for us. I also went down into the basement and I was looking through some of our historic boxes, and I could find some of the similar things that Rebecca was talking about tonight, that it was owned by a Van Vranken, that he was a supervisor. We do have evidence of that within the actual town historical vaults downstairs. The previous subdivision did call out saving this parcel. Whether or not it was a deed restriction, it was certainly discussed, and then the CAC has concerns about the environmental impacts, and even though the tree council does think that went out and saved those trees, their number one recommendation to the planning board was to see if you can do a configuration that saves more trees. I mean, that's what their final recommendation would be. They find those trees to be unique and valuable, and they're unusual in the town of Niskayuna, and anything that you guys can do to protect them, they would ask that you do.
Has anybody assessed the health of the trees in question?
Certified arborist has not been out there to assess the health of the trees.
Has or has not?
Has not. We don't typically send out certified arborists.
I remember that was a big issue with what's now Mansion Square. And when they started taking them down, I realized just how far gone many of those trees were. You know, going by the road, they looked fine, but as I saw them coming down, I saw huge hollows. They were clearly rotting in place.
Yeah, I mean,
So
not being an arborist, but trees store their, wastes inside. So it's typical that a tree can become hollow. That doesn't mean that it's structurally unsound. It just depends on what the tree is and what's going on there. But just because you cut down a tree and there's decay in the center doesn't mean that a tree was unhealthy.
The other thing that happens, and again, I'm definitely not an arborist, but it's my understanding that when you take down a certain number of trees within an area, it makes the trees around it weaker and more likely. So you might take out some bad trees, but you may, in the process of which, make those other trees remaining more likely to tip and fall as well.
yes and no, kind of depends on root structure and how much water they're getting and a whole bunch of other factors.
But for this proposal, we're not taking down a lot of trees. There's only a few trees that have to come down where the proposed homes are, and we're agreeing to keeping the trees that are shown on the site plan or on the subdivision plan. You know, some of the trees may need to be trimmed because you wouldn't want them hanging over a roof line. So, that
Unless
was another
someone's
thing that
happened to
we
get
discussed.
Accidentally taken down.
Yeah, accidents,
Yeah.
I've never heard of such a thing.
Yeah, and I hate to see, the applicant, and I know we have the right to, again, come in front of us and have this request to go and do lots of expense without getting, obtaining sketch plan approval. So I would say that we should have a resolution, you're saying that you're holding on the 3-lot minor subdivision. We should have a resolution prepared for the next meeting, right, Mr. McFarland, you okay with that?
Yeah, we've had the tree council make a recommendation. Do we need a recommendation from CAC for?
They will have that in time for next meeting.
And then we'll have to take action, and, you're holding, like I said, and we'll just have to make a decision.
Okay.
I went by the site today to take a look at it, and I have some of the sediments here. One of the great things about a historic home, especially a property like this, is it needs space. And when it's bookended by other homes, it starts to take away from the character of the properties. Now, I'm going to totally disagree with you on the carriage house not being sound and being moved 60 feet. I could almost guarantee that would be cheaper than building a brand new 2-car garage, 2+ car garage, or whatever it is. I mean, I've moved many structures.
But it's the risk of moving it, spending the money, and then not guaranteeing that structure being safe.
There's a risk in anything.
Right.
Risk in construction,
But that it's up to the developer at that point, not my decision.
I think it's more of a preference of not wanting to.
Mhm.
So I think the worst detriment to this is the lots that were developed are completely denuded. I mean, there's no trees there at all. And I went through the neighborhood today, And there's a good mix of old growth, some new growth, other new plantings you can see. I mean, these three properties, with the exception of the one on the northeast corner, they're completely gone. There's nothing there. Nothing.
Laura, can I just ask, just for the public's benefit, for my benefit, could we just recap the real estate transaction that preceded this? So in 2016, we approved the subdivision. And then, or at that point, the subdivision was approved and those 3 lots were then sold to Beacon Homes?
I know they were built by Beacon Homes. They were sold to, I'm not exactly sure.
I believe Mahar Builders owned the lots or bought
Yeah.
the lots.
Okay, yeah.
At the time of subdivision,
After
were all three?
subdivision was approved, then Mahar Homes or Mahar Builders bought those 3 lots.
Okay, let's not be coy.
Mahar and Beacon is the same.
Different legal entities.
Right. Beacon Homes builds the house. Mahar is the owner of Beacon Homes. So,
right.
yeah.
All right, so the lot was subdivided, 3 lots were sold presumably at the same time to
Actually,
Mahar.
they were all 4 sold at the same time.
4.
4 of the existing plus the 3 that were
Right.
created.
Okay, that's just an interesting, I want to get that fact pattern out there.
Okay. So 1380 was sold to Lessie and the other 3 were sold to Mahar.
I mean, they may have, I don't know what the actual entity is.
We can do this. We can just pull the deeds.
So,
Yeah.
That would be helpful.
so I'd like to, so where I'm parked right now is I would not like to see a resolution in the next meeting. I think I would like to see what the traceability is of how these properties were sold. Another thing that I think I'd like to see is I'd like to see what the planned architecture is of the houses that are planned for the 2 new lots in there and how they look compared to the rest. And I'll be blunt with you as to why I'm asking this question. The last property Mr. Lisi built some houses on, those houses are awful looking. On Whitney and Pierce. I drive by them every day.
Although we don't normally ask for comment from people in the audience, Ms. Holmes, would you mind telling us about the real estate transaction?
Thank you.
I can tell you exactly how the transaction went down. So I did the subdivision and I told you my goal was just to sell the house. I never advertised the lots. I only advertised the house. I didn't know what I was going to do with the lots. I had to get the house onto a smaller piece of property so that I could market it. Nobody wanted to buy a big piece of property and take care of it the way I did. And it was very difficult to sell it. So I never advertised the lots. I only advertised the house. And Mr. Lisi and his daughter approached me in about June of 2017 and made an offer on the house. Verbal offer. About 3 or 4 weeks later, this is getting a little bit nitty gritty, but it does, I think you need to hear this. 3 or 4 weeks later, I was finally presented with a written offer, which was very different from the verbal offer. And then I was told to tear up the offer. And then I had another offer, which was even worse. And at this point, I asked Mr. Lisi not to give me another offer until he was going to be a gentleman about it. So many months passed and I had an offer and I never marketed the lots, never put them on the market. I had an offer for the whole parcel, the whole thing, the old house and the lots. And I felt so great about it because I thought maybe somebody was going to buy it and keep it all together like I had. It finally happened, like 3 years after I put the house on the market. Finally, I found a buyer. And it was somebody named Shane Mahar. And it was, we had to work on it, but he was respectful and a quick closing, a cash deal, and we did it. But about 3 days after we signed the contract of sale, I did read an article in the paper and realized that Shane Mahar is the son-in-law of Lou Lisi.
Yeah, I mean, we
And
knew that, right?
perhaps the vice president of his company. So the day of the closing, we sold the entire parcel to Shane Mahar, but the whole thing. And then by the end of the day, as I learned later, the house and the carriage house portion had been transferred to Lou Lisi by the end of the day. So that is how it went down. And it was sort of not my intention to sell it to Mr. Lisi, but that's sort of the way it went down. So it's a little nasty, but you asked the question, and I'm giving you my absolute honest answer.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have none.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Holmes. So the transfer from Mahar to Lisi was a transfer, or was it a purchase, or do we know?
I don't know. We can check the county clerk's office. Might
Yeah.
probably deeded to him and subsequent deeds out to part of the property since it was separate lots at that point.
One of the concerns I have, though, is talking to the applicant, saying about architectural renderings and so on and so forth, and, we're basically only at the sketch plan approval. I hate to task the applicant to go off and do more work at expense, and then, for something that we're not happy with, So that's why I think we should have the resolution for sketch plan approval at the next meeting, and so we can send a clear signal to the applicant where we stand on this. The applicant said tonight, you're going to go forward with the 3-lot subdivision, and I think that's what we need to just act on.
I'll defer to your judgment, Mr. Chairman.
But I'd like to, I'm bringing that up for discussion here.
On that topic, I'll defer to your judgment, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, following up on Attorney Hess's comments, right, he's going to look into standards and review. So, I think that'll be something we'd like to rely on and review more carefully.
Okay.
And I have a question because it was raised by the public, whether we should now be applying the major subdivision rules. And I don't know how the ownership that has transpired over the years figures into that.
So there's definitely in subdivision law, the idea of having segmented review is discouraged. But frankly, I don't know how at this point we get to the point is treating this as a major subdivision. So although I would like to do that, and I think that some of the issues that have been raised, like surface water drainage, that type of thing, might have been appropriately addressed in a SWIP for a major subdivision. We're going to have to deal with those as real issues that address a minor subdivision.
That's kind of what I thought you were going to say, but I'm not an attorney, so thank you very much. I think the key word was that it's discouraged, but the segmented review is still legal, essentially.
Correct. It would be, but to the extent that the issue that has been raised by a number of residents regarding drainage is a real issue. So understand, I have zero technical competence in that issue. But assuming that it's a real issue, then that's something that this board has purview over, whether it's a minor subdivision or a major subdivision.
And if I could just add to the technical part of that, as far as drainage or SWIP goes, the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, whether it's a minor or major subdivision, DEC looks at it as the amount of disturbance. Here, we're proposing less than an acre of disturbance, which doesn't require a lot of erosion control and SWIP and stormwater basins and things like that. We're following the town code where you're not allowed to discharge any more peak runoff to your adjoining properties. And that's why on the one lot, we're proposing a rain garden, which in fact meets the criteria from the DEC regulations. But it's not necessarily required to meet their regulations because again, we're less than an acre of disturbance. You can actually go up to 5 acres of disturbance and still not need a full-blown SWIP. But of course, we have the typical erosion and sediment control measures designed in our subdivision plan where, you're putting up your stabilized construction entrances, you're putting up silt fencing, any other erosion control measures that are typically done. But, I just want to make that clear that regardless of a minor or major, that doesn't trigger a SWIP. It's DEC looks at it as amount of disturbance of land. So that's the technical aspect of that I thought the board should know.
And our expectation, whether it's a minor subdivision or a major subdivision, is that the runoff is going to be controlled and it will not lead to a big increase regardless.
Correct.
It should be no worse and hopefully better than
Well,
before.
yeah, but our code also has a provision in the subdivision regulations that, or the soil erosion and sediment control regulations, that if there's a known drainage issue, that the developer needs to do downstream analysis to make sure that he's not making it worse. And it doesn't, and it's cumulative. So if the previous subdivision that was approved created downstream issues and now there's a known drainage problem, that is something that is protected in our code. We've talked about it before. We talk about it in terms of Row Road. We've talked about it in terms of multiple places. So cumulative stormwater impacts are a real problem in Niskuna, and it's something that we thoroughly look at and thoroughly regulate. So it's not whether or not a SWIP is required or not for this project. It's where's the stormwater going? What effect is it having on the surrounding properties? And is it negative?
Laura, how long does it, and I think we can call some of our contacts here, but how long does it take to actually determine that cumulative impact?
I mean, I don't know. That's really an engineering question. I'll let the engineering department figure those
Okay,
things
so
out.
that's the question I'd like answered. How many seasonal, changes need to happen for a cumulative impact to be determined? Obviously, there were 3 new houses built up there, right?
Right.
And clearing done, so.
And clearly, if the engineering department has issues that are such magnitude that it would be imprudent for us to even go ahead with a sketch plan, it would be nice to know that before we vote on it.
I mean,
usually the engineering department thinks most things can be resolved if enough engineering is done and the applicants want to pay the money to do whatever is required. But if they see anything that's a real stopper, we should know about it. I don't think we're there, but I'm not an engineer.
All right, so
Be nice to have their input regardless.
it sounds like what I'm hearing from, and thank you, Mr. Khan, Mr. Scributinus, I do take obviously your comments to heart. It sounds like we have some legal feedback that we're still requesting prior to taking action here. And any large engineering challenges that, to be upfront based on the proposal. So it sounds like we are not ready for a resolution for the next meeting. But again, you guys are holding where you're at on the 3-lot subdivision. You've heard our concerns, you heard the public's concerns. And we'll hold off until Mr. McPartland and the team feels they're ready to take action on this then.
Okay, and then I guess one last thing, can we agree on a timeline? Like how long do you think you're gonna need to do your research?
Prior to the next meeting.
Okay.
We can put on the agenda for discussion next meeting. We can hopefully talk about
When's
results.
that, April 8th, I believe?
April 8th.
It's not out of the question for us to put a resolution on there, and then if your questions are answered at the meeting, you can
That's
vote
right.
on it at the meeting. And then if, you still want, then you guys just say, no, we still have outstanding questions, let's move.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I was at. We could always do a tentative resolution, and if everybody feels comfortable, we get our research done and we have our engineering questions. Just, I hate to, I respect the developer too. I don't want to lead anybody along. I want to, make a decision,
And I'll go with your judgment of that, Mr. So I'm okay.
All right,
with
all right.
to get a tentative.
Yeah.
McPartland, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I
Makes
would like
sense.
to move forward with the plan for a tentative resolution.
All right.
I think, and we can.
And we'll work on these
accommodate
questions,
these.
yeah.
All right, and so that could potentially save a meeting for you and the applicant, right? So
Yeah.
And
It's always helpful.
it is, yes.
in terms of the known issues with the water department, when are they gonna have their answers? Or not the one I just asked about the seasonal effect. I think we want to get that answer too, but
Oh, the
The known
utility
issues?
questions? I
Yeah.
think they just need to have a conversation with Luigi, on it.
All right. Okay, we'll put it back on, tentative resolution for the next meeting. And if we don't get there, we'll pull the resolution and we'll just have discussion where we're at, okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
for Luigi, you get all the tough ones.
Yeah.
All that's left.
He's the go-to guy, yep.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Good night.
All right, yeah, thank you. All right, we'll continue on the agenda with discussion items. And next up was the Architectural Review Board. And I guess that would be Laura or Mr. Diapino.
I'll take it? Okay.
Yes, please.
So we had a meeting and divided up some responsibilities to get at least an outline of the draft resolution together. And I think we've come up with some good groundwork to get started with. Do we want to go through these or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I sort of flip-flopped what Jeff and David did a little bit, but essentially the whereases talk about what we're attempting to do with the Architectural Review Board. And so that's preservation and improvement of aesthetic character of the town, which affects, quality of life and economic well-being of present and future inhabitants. Architectural integrity would be maintained in partnership with local officials and boards to further the progression of sound development design in town. So the furtherance of these goals, the town would establish an architectural review board. They would also establish goals for the architectural review board so that they can discharge their duties. And then just true of any of our resolutions, that it goes through the Economic Development, Historical Preservation, and Environmental Conservation Committee. So if you guys can think of anything else that we're really trying to go for with the Architectural Review Board besides those overarching preservation, improvement of aesthetic character of the town, and working together with, partnerships, that's where we would add those things. And then resolved that the town board would create the Architectural Review Board, and then establishing the roles and responsibilities. And this has got a little complicated. David, I know we talked about this a lot. So essentially, the Architectural Review Board would review new construction, exterior renovations, and additions to residential buildings. They would be a liaison between the town and applicants. They would ensure that projects maintain continuity within the various residential, commercial, and mixed-use districts, promote sustainable design, reinforce positive aesthetic impact to neighborhoods, and discourage adverse design elements, and make recommendations on alternative options, but in no way provide professional services for said projects. We looked at appointing 5 regular members. And then like the scope and powers, this is what we're so essentially anything that came before the planning board would be automatically referred to the Architectural Review Board, and at a cost. So that would help, I think, diffuse some of the staff time and things that would come from having an Architectural Review Board. They would also automatically be required to review the certain zoning board projects that, had architectural, large additions and things like that, because they're asking for relief from the code. So that would allow the Architectural Review Board to look at them and make sure that if they're getting relief from the code, they're going to be a benefit to the community in the way that they're designed. And then last, if a person was just coming for a building permit, they would be offered the Architectural Review Board as a service when the Architectural Review Board, when there's a certain threshold of change. And then the Architectural Review Board would meet monthly and give formal recommendations to the Planning Board and Zoning Board at cost to the applicant, and then essentially give informal recommendations to people on their single family home building projects. And then we talked about a certain time frame. We might be able to tighten up the time frame. It's not actually defined in here, but they would have a certain time frame they'd have to turn around stuff so that they wouldn't be causing delays to projects.
So in keeping with our conversation we had with Luigi tonight, at what point would we refer a matter to the board? So in this instance.
It wouldn't be sketch plan, right? Because so
Okay.
sketch plan, you're looking at, there's actually
Yeah.
the definition of what you review in the sketch plan is actually in the subdivision code, and it's utilities and wetlands and nature and general context of the neighborhood kind of thing. But certainly as long as you did sketch plan approval and then they went to minor subdivision, when they were actually at their minor subdivision or major and they were classified as a subdivision and they were paying to move forward with the subdivision is when we would refer them to the architectural review board.
Should a little bit of a roadmap just be inserted in the resolution so that, the public understands the sequence of events? Like at what point would it trigger?
Yeah, we could.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad idea, right? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I had a I had similar, because we say here, may request to receive an optional, right? So good example. So we say we could refer them, but the applicant say, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's optional. And it's a $200 fee if they decide to take up on that offer.
Oh, yeah, no,
That's-
for planning board, it would be mandatory, I think.
Projects requiring plan board review may request to receive an optional.
Okay, so we don't want that, no, okay.
Yeah, that's the way I interpret it, was that, it was optional for planning board. But what we're saying is we want the architectural review. Okay.
Would you make it mandatory to pull a building permit?
No,
No.
because we don't want to be, it needs to be a balance with private property, right? We just want it to be a service.
But we could, as a planning board, theoretically, we could say, you know what, we want the architectural review board to give us a recommendation.
Absolutely.
And
So it would be
And that
mandatory.
would not at all trigger
Right.
the fee to be paid from
Yeah.
the applicant, or would it then require? Would that then trigger them to pay that amount?
Well, we were talking like for major subdivisions where they're putting in 66 single family homes. I mean, maybe they give us some designs ahead of time or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So,
Because those are going to be a little tricky, right? They get the subdivision approval, but then who builds the house and who wants what house on what lot? So maybe you sort of approve like a palette of houses, but then when those individual lots are coming in, the architectural review board would still give them a cursory look or something like that.
yeah. All right. But bottom,
Builders will usually tailor to what the prospective homeowner wants.
Right. I mean, they'll pretty much build anything as long as it's within a certain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Budget.
Yeah.
all right.
And if they can't do that, then the lot might not sell.
Yeah, the whole intent of the architectural review board is not to make things unbuildable or unsellable. The whole point is just to make sure that things that are happening in the community happen in such a way that they, increase property value for
All right,
everyone.
especially in the
including
pre-existing
applicant.
community subdivisions, just like we were talking about earlier, right?
Mhm. And like Jengis brought this up, those two homes on Whitney Drive are the exact same home sitting next to each other, and you
Yeah.
have to drive by them every day, and
They're both look
it's not
equally
right.
awful.
Like for minor subdivisions, like
I don't know.
that is just not right. Like maybe you can just say your new single family homes for this subdivision have to be approved by the architectural review board.
Yeah, they
One-
need to complement each other, but not be identical.
Yeah.
One, so I'm very much in support of the board on, so I did anticipate number 2, that I think the people appointed to that board should have some background in architecture and design. I do think we need to be careful about one thing. We're limiting by having these kinds of qualifications necessary, we're definitely going to be dipping into people on this board that would be serving either as architects or developers or builders within the community. And so do we need to be a little more clear about people recusing themselves in certain,
Yeah. So
and definitely if you guys feel I'm bruised from the last discussion, I definitely am bruised from the last.
Oh, no, that's okay. So
Right.
you can't, like, I think it's actually New York State town law or whatever, but you can't be on a board that recommends something to a board that you actually have the legal right to take action on. So that's why there's no one on the planning board overlaps with the CAC. People in the CAC and the tree council can overlap because they don't make recommendations to each other and they're an advisory board. So like if the tree council makes a recommendation to the CAC can say, hey, yeah, we like that recommendation. We're going to pass that on to the planning board, but they never actually take legally binding action. So you can pass those people around. But people on those boards can never be on a planning board because you can't make a recommendation to yourself and then take action on it. So essentially, like if we were going to steal David and put him on the architectural review board, he wouldn't be able to make recommendations to himself in the planning board. So he would essentially not be able to be on there.
Yeah.
But we did put feelers out and we haven't even put it on the website and we've already gotten like 4 resumes.
Oh.
So there's definitely knowledge out there that I don't think that we'd have to steal from our own boards.
Ken was or something.
So I got a few comments. One is that that paragraph needs to be cleaned up to just an optional and what's
Yeah,
required. Okay?
definitely.
That's one thing. And then the paragraph above it, it says, and large single-family homes will be conducted. I mean, the word large is just subjective. Is that 4,000, 5,000, or 2,000 square
Yes.
feet? I would just strike the large maybe.
Mhm.
And then the only other concern I had was that the zoning board of appeals, all projects going through the ZBA would have to require a review, right?
Right.
One of the things that we run into there a lot is like emergent things that have to hurry up and make the ZBA because somebody either started construction or it's a pre-exist,
Actually, the ZBA never gets a hurry up.
no?
I know that happens to you guys, and I apologize for that, but you can't get on this ZBA unless you have a complete application the 15th of the month before the next meeting. So like you would have to have your application in for the 15th of March in order to be on the April meeting. You can change your case, but it has to be pretty
Okay.
well.
But this says that the
ZBA
architectural
gets
review
to-
board will have to also inject themselves in that time period, right, from the.
Yeah.
So, just
But
making
so
the
like,
point.
if the architectural review board is meeting every month, we essentially have a month and a half, a month for
Right.
all the zoning board cases
Okay.
before they get
I just want to make
presented.
sure. Now, if the architectural review board has a concern with the proposed, say, garage or addition, right? And they send back a negative recommendation saying, hey, this is going to be an impact. Would the ZBA then be able to take that information to deny the request for the applicant?
I mean, the ZBA has a certain criteria that they'd have to use.
So they would have to fit that into to
Yeah.
the enumerated criteria. Like an area variance has like a 4-part balancing test.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be that hard to balance it with that. Use variance actually has a compulsory test. So I guess it would just be in the area variance, like one of the factors.
Yeah, it would be like character of the neighborhood, right? So if they're asking for like a 5-foot setback, but their addition is gonna look horrible, you can be like, can you do
Yep.
this?
No,
And the
and
applicant is
again, I
like, "No."
support this. I just wanted to make sure we thought of all the angles, make sure it works, that's all. I appreciate your work, Dave, on this, and Laura. And,
Yeah,
you know.
usually with ZBA, they're developed far enough along that they have the drawings.
Yeah.
So they can
Yeah.
react to them within that month.
Yeah.
That's what we thought they could react within
Yeah.
the month timeframe that they needed to. So an applicant wouldn't be drawn out several months waiting
Yeah.
for recommendations.
I remember a case where there was, I believe it was a carport over
Yeah.
near WTRY Road where the applicant was sent back to do sketches, or there were some changes, recommendations in order to minimize the impact on the neighbor.
Yeah, they do stuff like that.
So
really
that's where,
regularly.
this would be beneficial. Hopefully it wouldn't get that far where it would be, I guess it was adjourned and postponed until the next meeting
And then it was
because of those
denied.
questions.
And then it was denied.
Was it denied?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. I only caught part of it, so it was denied, huh? Oh, okay.
Can I ask, if you recall, Dave, in a previous meeting, was an applicant, was it cell phone service in the old EMS store in Mohawk Commons? Dave caught issues with the demising wall and the interior space layout.
Mhm.
Would we ever consider interior examination? That was an interesting issue, but for Dave, Dave was, looking at fire sprinkler suppression, demising wall.
And
Was that a
noise.
subject? It was an
Yeah, it
interesting
was a
catch.
noise.
Yeah,
Would that be a subject?
they could, right? I mean,
But for Dave, none of us would have known that. So if
Yeah,
Dave's not on the
it's true.
board, what are we going to do? But nevertheless, it's an interesting issue, right? There's going to be instances where interior space may be meaningful. Are we going to overreach? That was a little overreach.
I think it may be a little bit of an overreach because it's a mild commitment for the board as it is.
Yeah.
And you're having them focus on the exterior and the aesthetics, I think is a
That's
good
intent.
first step. If we see
Right.
this evolve over time, that might just be a standalone that my experience was brought to questioning that just because of what the two tenants are going to have right
Yeah,
next to each
okay.
other. But getting in the interiors is going to be tough unless it's something on the National Register. If somebody wanted to really butcher a building that's, pretty tiered in Niskayuna, then I think there would be more than just the architectural review board involved in that oversight at least.
And I think a lot of people consider it a total invasion of privacy, frankly,
Yeah.
and I would be one of them. I
yeah,
think
that's
the
a
question-
balance, right? You don't want it to go too far into private property.
It was an issue that Dave
Yeah.
caught in a commercial fit up, which is interesting and relevant.
And for in terms of scope and powers, the third to last paragraph, right? There is quite a bit of information in our town code about aesthetic standards, right?
For certain zones,
certain zones,
yeah,
right.
like commercial, shopping commercial has pretty strong
Yep.
standards, and the town center overlay district has some standards. And I think CN might reference
Right.
a little bit.
So, I mean, the only reason I brought that up is that there would at least be a basis against which the architectural review board can can measure its recommendations, right, to, at least in those zones.
Well, I mean, I assume it'd be kind of akin to like the CAC. The CAC, makes decisions about, the trees in a particular area or the drainage. It doesn't mean we have to accept them.
No,
But it's like-
yeah,
but
no,
it's
that
like
part is
something
clear.
that,
I'm just actually,
Yeah.
I'm thinking from the perspective of the liability of that board. At least they've got a basis from which to work from, right? In terms of where those recommendations exist in the code.
The old code also had some literature in there about one member being a licensed architect. I don't know if that would be prudent to have on here or necessary.
That might be tough. That was one of the problems that the town had with the original, keeping it staffed with people who met the requirements. And on that note, I think there's a typo because it currently says the fields of architecture of design. I think that's meant to be an or.
Yeah.
And I would still recommend that one of the 5 just be a regular citizen. And I noted after the last meeting that the state education boards for the various professions all have at least one member who's not a member of any of the professions that board covers. And the intent is just to have somebody looking out for the public interest and maybe keeping things down to a more average person's perspective. So
Yeah.
things don't go too far overboard.
We talked about that, but we figured like staff will be there and staff is kind of a regular person.
No, but
people
is
share
there a way
that
to
opinion.
compromise? Go ahead. No, is there some way to which to say like at least the majority of the members or something like? I agree the idea that actually having, we're all not, or maybe some of us are architects, but but we do have sort of intuitive sense of what flows and what doesn't flow. And so I think it's just, I think maybe is there some way in which to split the baby, for lack of a better expression, to say, majority of which shall have experience, but at least kind of leave the opportunity for, some regular citizens who laymen, for lack of a better word, who have who might be.
Concerted interest,
Yeah.
maybe?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely can.
I think
It's fine.
I have 2 other questions. As written, this would cover both variance requests for pools and for decks. Was that the intent? I can possibly see decks. I cannot see pools going through this.
I don't think so.
Yeah, maybe we should be a little more clear about what exactly gets referred, but I think we were only talking about
structures.
Structures,
Like if
but
they were
not
gonna-
even sheds, right?
Like if they were going to put a cabana house next to the pool or a shed that was going to act as a accessory structure.
But a lot of the ZBA variance requests over the years have been for pools.
Yeah, they are. And fences. And I mean,
Yeah.
realistically, we're
And
not going to be looking at fences
Maybe,
either.
maybe we just need to exclude a couple things like that.
Okay.
I'm a bureaucrat. I'm used to dissecting proposed legislation or whatever.
The goal is to have this town board meeting for the April,
Mhm.
right? So we got some time to.
Mhm. Yeah, we could update it and bring it back to you next meeting.
Anybody else? Anybody else have any comments? Or?
It's actually Dave and Jeff did it.
Jeff? Thank you, everybody. Yeah, appreciate it. Anything else, David, on that?
No, I mean, this will overlap on historic properties, and I know a lot of them have been identified in the comprehensive plan. So it's probably one of the few things that we would start with the ARB members, if it's adopted, to say, here's some important features, let's look through these, and then we can work on what the goals will be, what they're actually going to be looking to do for their responsibilities.
Dave, I guess I have a question, just trying to understand kind of the scope of the review for, let's say, like a single-family addition. And the design standards used, would they vary by neighborhood? Let's say, for instance, there was a proposed addition in a neighborhood that's generally considered a Paul Schaefer neighborhood. Would this architectural review board apply different design standards for something occurring in that neighborhood as compared to, let's say, Rosendale Estates, or I don't know? somewhere elsewhere? in the
State Street.
Yeah, they would, in my opinion. They would want to look at not only the language of that house and the characteristic and what it would be classified as, they would want to make sure that that addition would be appropriate. And then also, we want to encourage them to not only look at that house, but the rest of the streetscape. So as you say, you look down, say, Rosendale Road, and there's a house that wants to do an addition that's 1,500 square feet, which is pretty sizable. Does it, have the right roof lines? Are the proportions correct? Does it harmonize with it? And if they notice the next 3 houses down have something similar or it's staying in character, then it would be a good idea. They wanted to tack on a 3-car garage on the front of it because a new build down the street did that. That might not be as appropriate for a house that was built in the 1920s. And those are the examples where you want to lean on the Architectural Review Board to help steer the development in the right direction. So I think each neighborhood would definitely, on the residential side, be affected. And commercial would be a case-by-case basis. So there's not a lot of commercial districts that have running buildings in a row that we have here. We've got, Mohawk Commons is same kind of structure, and then other big box buildings that have their own architectural language there. But if you were to take, say, a section of, say, Union Street, and there was a potential development that could do 2 blocks in a row, maybe we look at a running theme for there, as opposed to, kind of dropping single pieces arbitrarily all over.
So it's more organic than having a playbook or some kind of prescribed design standard based on where it's located. It's a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. If somebody wanted to put a glass box onto a Schaefer home, a very modern addition, there could be an argument made for that by an architect for different reasons, but the Architecture Review Board may want to look at that and say, is it really appropriate to do that? There may be merit to doing it. There may be merit to not doing it. So that's what you would want to try to vet out. The other thing you definitely want to avoid is the types of additions that don't span multi-generational use or that aren't constructed well. And that's where I think the building department is going to run into having to see those and these applications come back 10, 20 years later that the addition is failing. It's, they got to go back through another use permit. It doesn't, it didn't meet the setbacks to begin with, and they got a variance, then they went through. So they had already put some money into it. The house is sold, and all of a sudden they come back and they have to redevelop it again because, I don't know,
It was messed.
it just didn't hold up. So
Oh, but even though this would be like a great service, and we'll see how it works. I mean, if somebody wanted to put a glass box on their Schaefer house and the Architectural Review Board was like, it's really not in character with the community, can you consider other things? What about your batten boarding, siding, or whatever? The person could still do it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a private home. But like theoretically, if you're working with them and you're a liaison and you're showing them what's surrounding their home and you're talking to them about the value that comes from keeping all of the homes in harmony with each other, not just to that house, but your whole neighborhood, theoretically, like you're bringing people in and they're understanding things a little bit better. And then hopefully they'll choose to move forward in a direction that's, that'll help everyone, including themselves. And theoretically, like almost mostly themselves.
Yeah, help themselves in the long run.
Yeah.
I think you'll see a lot of these designs get refined for the betterment of the applicant, as opposed to the detriment of them saying, "Oh, this is really difficult. I don't understand." I mean, very few applications that go through the ZPA, or at least that we see, are not developed enough that you're like, "Oh, that just is terrible," or "That's not going to stand up or hold up." It's trying to get them to encourage to say, okay, maybe you do spend a little bit more money on this portion of it because it's going to be a little bit better, or your roof line could be adjusted here. It's minor refinements. It's not, if you're in a historic, what's the word I'm looking for?
District?
Like if you're in a district, there's set rules and regulations you have to follow. This is not that at all. It's just encouraging them to do something appropriate with the house so that it's going to, be sustainable for not only their ownership, but, other owners down the line.
There's the question. Can a neighbor refer something, or does it have to be,
It has to be voluntary.
Come in and take a
But
look at
but a neighbor could say to their other neighbor, like, "Hey, you're doing a big addition. The Niski unit has a great architectural review board that can really help you."
Architectural review.
Yeah.
Couple other possible exclusions. Do we want them looking at tree houses?
No, tree houses are not actually governed by town code, by building code.
They have been.
It only if they're
If there's enough
if they're-
accessory structures and they want to put up a tree house. We had a case come into town hall years ago.
yeah, if
And I think it wound up in court, actually.
if they're tied to the ground in some manner, you can regulate them. But if they're entirely contained within a tree, they're not regulated by the building code.
Do you need a building permit?
For a tree house that is not tied to the ground with foundations or anything like that, no.
I don't remember that one was, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, a lot of them do come down to the ground in some manner, but tree houses, like actual like platforms up inside trees, they're not mandated by the building code. If
So they would
probably
not be
bad idea to build them to begin with.
I'm building mine with one of those escape ladders, Mr. Scrivby, so I can get in and out without touching the ground.
I'll be leaving the board if we do it. That'll be the last meeting.
And do we still have a designation for something called temporary sheds?
Not that I know of.
It used to be if the tent is constructed one way, it was considered a temporary structure.
No.
And if it were put in with proper footings and all, then it was a permanent
No.
structure and counted.
They're only regulated now based on size.
Okay.
So you can pick those things up and move them around pretty easily, but
Yeah.
they are, even if they are temporary sheds, they're considered just an accessory structure that needs a building permit, subject to our setback
So they-
requirements.
Would they go to the architectural review board as well? If they needed a variance?
The sheds.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, theoretically,
Okay.
I think we were talking about major accessory structures. So minor accessory structures under 120 square feet, probably not. But
Okay.
any major, you don't normally see sheds going to the zoning board that are minor accessory structures because they only need to be 5 feet away from the lot lines. But the major ones that start to get bigger, those are the ones that go to the zoning board. And those are the ones that have impacts on the community because they're larger.
I know a lot of do-it-yourselfers like kits.
Yeah, well, yeah. Or you go to Lowe's and you just pick one up. Those tend to be under 120 square feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which
Although
still
you
need a
can't buy
building
big
permit.
You still can get bigger ones, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else on the architectural review board? No. Thanks again. We'll look forward to the, I guess, updated revision and take another look at it next meeting. All right, and we'll move on to the neighborhood mixed-use review in regards to the OD Heck parcel. Laura put together an agenda statement, and I know we all got an email, I believe it was earlier in the week, that summarized kind of where we're at and what the next steps were. I could read those, or we could just turn it over to Laura, and then you could kind of say where we stand.
Just real quick, I guess, even though I feel like we've been pretty clear, there's been misunderstandings, I think, about what the planning board is trying to accomplish. And that's just changing the underlying zoning. And we want to make sure that we're being careful not to trigger the state to do something like mass sell of the property or do anything like that. I think we can all agree that R2 is probably not the most appropriate zoning that there is, but our neighborhood mixed use code needs a lot of work. So what we're going to do is we're just going to sort of put a pause button on OD Heck, just set it aside for a little while, and then we're going to get our subcommittee going on the neighborhood mixed use code and make sure that that works. And I mean, the theory or the understanding is that neighborhood mixed use code, when we get it right and we know that it's not going to have drive-throughs and it's not going to create these problems that we've heard that we don't want to be creating, when we get that code to a place that we're very comfortable with, we can look at it applying to the OD Heck property again. But I think right now we're just going to set it aside because we think we need a lot of work on our code. I feel like that came out from our public hearings and we're listening to people, and we just want to make sure that it doesn't need to be rushed. We can go very slowly, step by step, and make sure that we get it right. And the other thing that I put in the memo, Jeff says that he learned this, every day that he was in his planning classes at college. I think I'm too old to have learned this, but the retail, the whole stage and scale of retail is changing with the way that online's working. And I need to send it out to you, but we have a copy of the colony plan, which I sent you the entire thing, not expecting you to read it. But there was something in there which they're acknowledging that essentially retail space is built out, and they're going to have to figure out a way to deal with vacant big box stores and things of that nature. And they're actually putting that in their comprehensive plan, which, you know, when we do a new comprehensive plan, we probably will too. But I mean, it makes sense to get a neighborhood mixed use zone right now, because maybe ODHEC isn't the perfect place for it, but maybe, you know, 10, 15 years from now, Mohawk Commons, all the big box stores are gone. Like what would we want to see to create something in our community that, you know, which we've already talked about, you know, multiple types of housing, walkability, like places where people want to live, like going through the suburban planning books, like really figuring out where's the next place that we can take the town that's really going to work, right? And then when we get that zone and we're comfortable with the places that we're going, we can look at ODHEC parcel again.
My understanding all along is that we're just trying to be like good scouts and be prepared.
Yeah.
Because bottom line is, we don't know when the state is going to leave
No.
the site, if ever.
Right.
We just don't know. And the state has frankly not been forthcoming with information.
Right.
Despite numerous inquiries over the years from the town.
Right. And like we were talking, like there's potentially a lot of asbestos in the vacant buildings. Disconnecting them from the central heating and cooling system could be really costly, and, you know, demolition costs. And we've had this conversation before, but what we wouldn't want to do is, you know, create all of a sudden a vacancy there where the property can't be developed because it's so costly to take those buildings down. So like we still need that information from ODHEC to figure out exactly where ODHEC's going. And then, but in the meantime, we can make sure that we get our neighborhood mixed use code right. So it's ready.
Yeah, so Laura, I'm in 100% agreement with everything that you've said and that Leslie said. And so the only thing though is I would like to see us bring this to a conclusion
Yeah.
with the zoning within the near future. I mean, we can slow down, but I think not too slow.
Right. So I still have essentially an RFP out to engineers
Okay.
asking what it would take for them to sketch out and work with us on the neighborhood mixed use code. And I think like there's going to be getting me proposals on Wednesday. So we can look at those proposals. The subcommittee can look at them. Like if it makes sense to work with, you know, not ODHEC parcel, like just an imaginary parcel, to see what it would take to sketch out this neighborhood mixed use, like however we need to work it, so that we can get the code sketched up, figure out what we're trying to accomplish, then call a public hearing on that.
Yep.
And then, so the next steps, I think I put them in there, would be, we'll hopefully hire a contractor to help us with the neighborhood mixed use zone, and they can meet with the subcommittee, and then we can bring back these recommendations to the planning board. The planning board can get comfortable with the neighborhood mixed use code, call for a public hearing, make sure that that's the underlying zoning that we think is most appropriate for the ODHEC parcel, and then make a recommendation to the town board
Right.
with the two together or just a single. But I think that it's worth looking at the two together. But for right now, we're just going to make sure that we get the neighborhood mixed use code right.
And there's no walkthrough at the ODHEC.
And there's no walkthrough. I did not understand them very well.
Walkthrough for us, right?
For us.
Right. They said they can take
Have
Jeff
you
and I.
guys, have you and Jeff have an
Yeah,
appointment? Right?
They said that they can take Jeff and I on April 8th. But
It's really it's worth it. I think.
yeah, we figured, I mean, we're not going to say no to that, but I
Might
guess
find
it's
out.
kind of a big deal for them to take that large of an amount of people through there.
Sure, there's patients that live there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're inhabitants.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Great.
Thank you, Laura.
I'm sure you'll give us a great report once you've had your opportunity to view the place, so.
So I will probably reach out to David and Mike, hopefully like Thursday morning, hopefully, and let you guys know what we got back from our engineers and see if we can work with that and move forward. I know we already reached out to Nick, and he's willing to be on our neighborhood mixed use subcommittee, which is great. He did a lot of research, so we think he's going to be a real resource. And David and Mike also have a lot. But if there's other people that we can think of to be on that committee, we're certainly, right now we only have 3, right?
That's it.
That's
So-
good. And look, I think the point you made about it's not just ODHEC, it could actually be, there's other candidate locations in Niskuna.
I mean, maybe.
And given
right?
our retail reality right now, I think it's the right thing.
It's really important for us to be thinking about it because, you know, the retail is changing, and I don't know if I copied you guys, but like the amount of square foot of retail space that we have in America compared to like any other country in the world is
Europe,
like
yeah,
unbelievable.
yeah, absolutely.
So like
We're over retail.
yeah, like
By a lot.
figuring out like repurposing and redeveloping, and that's probably what's in the future for Niskuna is really valuable to do now, so we can figure out where we're going. And it doesn't seem like that long, but the comprehensive plan is going to roll around again because that's what they do. So it's all tied together.
Okay. No, thanks. And if you have meetings, it'd be great to just to make sure the board knows about
Copy
those.
everybody.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we can hopefully stop in or attend if we're available, okay? And help out. Anything else for Laura on that? No? All right. All right, Laura, do you have anything for reports tonight?
No, but I did want to mention for the record that we did hand out hard copies of a letter from Rita Fleischman that we received today.
Oh, yep.
And in opposition to the 1380 Van Antwerp subdivision. And Jeff said that he also received, I was out this afternoon, I don't know, 3 more.
Yep, about 2 or 3 more, so I'll send those out tomorrow morning along with the electronic copy of the
Will
letter
we-
you'll receive.
All right. And there was an email, there was some already sent out, right?
Correct, about
Yeah.
11, yep, 10 or 11.
10.
Okay, thanks, Jeff, for doing that.
Yeah,
Okay, nothing else, Laura?
I think that's good. If you guys can think of anything. Yeah.
How about,
Nope, we're good.
Yeah, is there any questions for Laura at all? Okay. All right, Commission Business, Mr. DiPino?
The Kelly Adirondack Center has offered their booth at Niskaday to help collect information on Schaefer Homes.
Oh, that's
They
great.
reached out this week, so
That's
I'm gonna
clever.
get Margie in contact with Jeff and Laura here to maybe see what we need to do, just trading information wise. And
Right. That's really clever.
also, I know we were gonna try to get an article or something going. Maybe that's a good time to do it before then, or see how we can gather some information. But they're definitely a huge resource. They get hundreds of people to go through that tent on a good day, so.
Yeah, I think we were gonna, when's Niska Day, May?
Yeah.
May?
It's the
weekend
before
Memorial Day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we could do our presentation. We were gonna do a presentation at the town board and I think try and coordinate that presentation with some press release or something.
Yeah.
So that we can, maybe we could do that so it's timed and then the Niska Day booth would reinforce.
Great. Anything else, Dave?
That's it.
Mr. Oster?
Nothing.
Marla? Nothing for me. Con?
Nothing personally, but I do have a question for Rob.
Yeah.
What you'd mentioned earlier about modifying the code for the serial subdivisioning.
Yeah.
What's the process and when is that going to happen? Or
Probably the next time we do code amendments. So we've looked at the draft language already. But to do any change to our town code requires a public hearing, and then the amendments get voted on. So,
okay, so you don't have a timeline yet in mind for.
no, so
But I mean, theoretically, if we're doing the, the public hearing for the neighborhood mixed use code, I mean, we could have a public hearing for the subdivision code amendments. I guess it'd just depend if we can put them together.
Would you have the architectural review board at the same time?
The architectural review board is straight to the town board. It's just a resolution.
I'm not sure if we want to wait and link them all together. I think if we're going to do whichever way, but
Get going on the subdivision code amendment.
yeah.
I agree.
When you get bitten once, you like to cure the bite.
Well, I'm curious to see the wording on that because I think it's going to have to be very careful because there are cases where further subdivision would be totally appropriate.
That's the choice that the applicant gets to make. So if they want to avoid doing the extra process and paying the parkland fees, they can apply all at once.
Yeah, you really want to see it all at once, right? I think that I've heard from the CAC frustration over the way that the Serafini, Angelina, Rao Road was very segmented. It came through the planning board over the course of 15 years, 4 or 5 lots at a time. And so it was never fully evaluated as the giant subdivision that it actually was.
And I mean, and this is where we get into the legal nitty gritty of it, but in this particular case with Van Antwerp, by the letter of the law, this thing looks like it's correct.
Well, so first of all, I'll brief the board more on the legal issue, but I really don't agree. So if they've satisfied the density component, that they don't need any variances, but that's not where the inquiry ends. So,
No,
but to the sense of making sure that future purchasers know they can't come back is the message we want to send to them. When you make your offer for the property, you should do it based on what you see, not on the idea that you can subdivide if it's been subdivided before.
I have to say, and I'm also extremely concerned that whatever is in the plan on the tree removal, there will be more trees taken down than what actually is in the plan. That's my concern.
Probably not necessarily by the developer, but over the years to come. But that could happen anyway, as long as it's in private ownership.
I guess it's the experience of past developments in that area from the particular developer.
And I can understand that feeling.
Okay.
But homeowners do. over
Okay, and I'm
time
sorry,
find an
yeah, I
issue
brought
with
this up in
trees.
my section. Sorry,
No,
I have
sorry.
nothing more.
No, it's
I'm good.
Don? Good. Ms. Gold? And the only thing, I may be not available at April 22nd meeting, but more to follow. I'll just give a heads up there. But I'll confirm that by the 8th or so. All right, but I have no other comments. Motion to adjourn?
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lieutenant, seconded by Mr. Khan. And thank you, everybody. It was a good meeting, good discussion tonight. By the way, I want to apologize. I wasn't trying to, going for the thing.
No, hang on.